Everyone knows the Amazon River is one of the longest, wildest waterways on Earth, but few know it may also carry the lost memory of a warrior society, led by women, so fierce and so unexpected that early European explorers questioned their own sanity after seeing it. In 1542, a starving Spanish conquistador stumbled out of the rainforest claiming his expedition had been ambushed, not by men, but by tribes of armed women. They fought with arrows, commanded villages, and defended their territory like seasoned tacticians. His name was Francisco de Orellana, and the story he told was so strange it became legend, a legend powerful enough to name a river. But was it fantasy, a colonial exaggeration, or a glimpse of something real, something long misunderstood? Today on Armchair Archaeology, we're following that story from ancient Greek myth to indigenous memory, unearthing clues from archaeology and oral tradition, and meeting the modern women who still carry this legacy forward. And before we're done, you'll discover a bizarre linguistic twist buried in the name Amazon, an almost comical mistranslation that might flip the entire legend on its head. Stick with us, because the jungle has always kept its secrets. Some are older than history, and some are still alive. Before we begin tracing these legends through soil, song, and story, hit that subscribe button. Armchair Archaeology is where myths meet the material world, and every episode brings something unexpected. The Amazon River is often seen as a vast, untamed wilderness, but to the people who've lived along its banks for thousands of years, it's never been just a river. It's a sacred force, a source of life and identity, woven into creation myths, origin stories, and the rhythm of daily survival. Long before Europeans arrived, the Amazon was understood not through maps or measurements, but through meaning. Indigenous traditions across the basin describe powerful ancestral figures, many of them women, who shaped the world. In the Tucano, for example, the river is said to have formed from the path of an ancestral woman whose blood seeded the land with life. In these stories, feminine power isn't metaphorical, it's geological. The river itself is born of womanhood, strength, and sacrifice. So when Spanish explorers like Francisco de Orellana first journeyed down the Amazon in the 16th century, they entered not a void, but a densely storied world. What they saw, or thought they saw, often collided with their expectations. In some indigenous groups, women served as spiritual leaders or wielded real influence in war councils. These glimpses of unfamiliar gender dynamics were filtered through European myths, especially the ones they brought with them from home. In the many reports sent back to Europe, Orellana stood out. He described how his expedition came under attack by women firing arrows from the jungle banks, fighters so skilled and organized that he believed they governed entire settlements. European chroniclers, reaching for a familiar frame of reference, labeled them Amazons. And just like that, the name leapt from Greek myth to a South American river. The jungle never claimed the term, but the myth stuck. And the idea of a land ruled or defended by powerful women has echoed through every retelling since. Long before Europeans ever glimpsed the Amazon, they carried with them a vivid image of warrior women, Amazons from Greek mythology. These fierce archers lived beyond the borders of the known world, ruled themselves without men, and rode into battle with terrifying skill. They were exotic, dangerous, and entirely female. To the Greek imagination, they were both a fantasy and a warning. So when Francisco de Orellana returned to Spain in the 1540s, claiming his expedition had been attacked by female warriors deep in the jungle, it didn't take much for the story to catch fire. He described the women as disciplined, organized, and powerful, fighting from the forest with bows and tactics that rivaled any army. His chroniclers didn't hesitate. These were Amazons, and the river he traveled, once unnamed on European maps, would now bear that title.
The Amazon wasn't just mapped, it was mythologized, its name echoing a European imagination more than indigenous reality. Orellana's account came at a time when explorers were desperate to impress their patrons and secure future voyages. His tale was both thrilling and useful. But what makes it harder to dismiss as pure fantasy is that he wasn't alone. Over the next century, other missionaries, traders, and soldiers described encounters with indigenous communities where women held political and even military authority. Some wrote of councils where elder women decided tribal matters. Others described women who led raids or stood armed in defense of their villages. These reports were often confused, sometimes contradictory, and nearly always filtered through European biases. But taken together, they suggest a recurring theme: that the presence of powerful women in Amazonian societies wasn't just a traveler's fever dream, it was part of a pattern, glimpsed again and again. And once myth and observation blurred, it became impossible to separate them. The legend crossed oceans and took root in real geography. To understand the stories of Amazonian warrior women, we need to start by shedding European assumptions about what leadership and gender are supposed to look like. Across the Amazon basin, indigenous societies were structured around principles that often defied Western norms. Power didn't always come through warfare or kingship. It could be spiritual, communal, or inherited through the maternal line. And in many of these societies, women were not exceptions to power, they were essential to it. Among the Shipibo Conibo of Peru, women have long held influence as healers, midwives, and spiritual guides, roles that conferred authority within the community. In some Tupi-speaking groups, status passed through the maternal line, making women central to political alliances and property control. When early chroniclers saw women taking part in decisions about war or leading rituals, they often misinterpreted those moments through the lens of their own gender expectations. These roles weren't ceremonial decorations, they were the backbone of decision-making systems that often confused outsiders. Jesuit accounts from the 18th century describe villages where elder women had final say in whether men could go to war. These weren't symbolic roles, they were grounded in age, experience, and spiritual responsibility. To European observers, it was disorienting. To the communities themselves, it was tradition. In the northwest Amazon, among groups like the Tucano and the Carajá, ideas of gender were even more complex. Spiritual and ceremonial roles weren't rigidly tied to male or female identities. Leadership could shift based on a person's ritual function, age group, or kinship network. In this context, a woman leading warriors or guiding spirits wasn't transgressive, it was respected. These weren't isolated anomalies, they reflected sophisticated and adaptable systems of leadership, ones that allowed for powerful women to rise and for roles to be shaped by responsibility rather than biology. European stories tried to turn them into myth, but in the forest, they were just part of life.
For centuries, many dismissed the idea of complex societies in the Amazon. The rainforest was thought too harsh, the soil too poor to support large populations or organized communities. But archaeology is steadily proving otherwise. Beneath the jungle canopy lie remnants of ancient settlements, plazas, earthworks, causeways, and ceremonial mounds, many of them built by cultures that thrived long before European contact. And among the ruins, some of the most compelling clues about female authority come from how the dead were buried. Across sites in Acre, the Upper Xingu, and along the Tapajos River, archaeologists have uncovered graves containing women buried with items that weren't merely decorative: elaborate ceramics, polished stone tools, and in some cases weapons. These weren't random inclusions. The layout, care, and symbolic value of the objects suggest these women held high status in life, possibly as spiritual leaders, healers, or even commanders. At Mirajo Island, near the river's mouth in northern Brazil, mound-building cultures flourished for centuries. Here, female burials have been found with ceremonial axes, ornate headdresses, and intricately painted urns, objects linked to authority and public ritual.
Their placement in large communal mounds indicates these women were respected figures, not just in death, but in the structure of society. One burial near Santarem, once overlooked as insignificant, revealed the remains of a woman interred with an engraved stone club. It was a weapon but also a symbol of rank. There's no name carved in stone, no biography written down, but the message and how she was buried is clear. She mattered. Together these burials hint at a pattern, one where power wasn't always loud, but unmistakably present in ritual and legacy. No single grave confirms the legend of Amazonian warrior queens, but each discovery chips away at the idea that such women couldn't have existed. The evidence isn't loud, but it's there, quietly rewriting the assumptions beneath our feet. These silent clues in the soil, ceremonial axes, engraved clubs, women buried with status, are just the beginning. If you're intrigued by ancient mysteries and lost knowledge, Secrets of the Ancient World unpacks stories that history textbooks leave out. Links in the pinned comment. Not all history is written in stone. In the Amazon, the past often lives in voices, sung around fires passed down through generations, carried in rituals and ceremonies. For many indigenous peoples, oral tradition isn't just storytelling, it's a living archive where memory and myth blend to preserve what matters most. Among the Yanomami who live along the Brazil-Venezuela border, stories tell of female spirits who enforce balance between humans and nature. The Munduruku from the Tapajós River Basin speak of a time when women were the first to hold the sacred tools of war, tools later handed to men only after a great transformation. These aren't fairy tales, they're cultural memories wrapped in symbolism shaped by centuries of retelling. Some traditions speak of women who defended sacred ground with force, not just spiritual strength. Among the Ticuna people near the western Amazon, elders recall a band of women warriors who used poison darts and ambush tactics to drive out invaders. Whether mythologized or based on real events, the story holds a deeper truth. Power was not bound by gender. And among the Kokama who live along the Solomais River, there is the story of a river guardian, a female spirit who emerges in times of danger to protect her people. Sometimes described as a warrior, other times as a shapeshifter, she appears not just in legend, but in ceremonial songs that call on her for guidance and defense. These traditions don't need outside validation to be meaningful. They preserve the identities of those who refuse to be erased. While European explorers recorded fragments, indigenous communities never stopped telling the full story. And in their telling, the warrior woman was never a myth. It was memory, sung, spoken, and still alive.
The stories of Amazonian warrior women raise a question that doesn't have a simple answer. Were they real individuals or symbolic figures created through myth? In many indigenous worldviews, that distinction doesn't always matter. Myth and memory are intertwined, carrying truth even when the details shift. European chroniclers were often confused by what they saw. A woman participating in war councils or leading ceremonies could be interpreted as a queen, a warrior, or a threat to the natural order. The narratives they brought home mixed fact with fantasy, reshaping local customs into legends that fit their own cultural scripts. But inside the cultures themselves, stories served a different purpose. They didn't aim to document events as fixed facts. They preserved values, responsibilities, and ancestral knowledge. A woman who led a defense of her village might become more than a leader in later retellings. She might become a protector spirit, honored through ritual rather than biography. Among communities in the Upper Rio Negro region, there's a story of a woman who led raids to defend sacred land. Over generations, her name was lost, but her image remains, now invoked in ceremonial dances as a guardian of the river, a being both human and ancestral. Her legacy wasn't written down, but it was never forgotten. Her story didn't need a name to endure, just repetition, rhythm, and reverence. Rather than trying to separate the real from the symbolic, it may be more meaningful to ask what these stories were meant to carry forward. They speak of leadership, resistance, and spiritual authority, and they do so in ways that Western history often struggles to recognize. In the Amazon,
A warrior doesn't have to be carved in stone to be remembered. She just has to be spoken about, and she still is. To call these stories myth misses the point. They're memory encoded in ritual, and memory is power. The image of women taking up arms, leading troops, defending territory, or commanding societies is often treated as an outlier. But history offers more than a few examples. Across cultures and continents, women have fought, ruled, and shaped the course of events, not as myth, but as part of the historical record. In the Eurasian steppes, ancient Scythian burial sites, dating back over 2,000 years, have revealed women buried with weapons, armor, and horses. Some of these remains show signs of combat injuries, indicating they weren't symbolic figures, but active warriors. These women are now believed to have inspired the original Greek tales of the Amazons. In West Africa, the Kingdom of Dahomey, in present-day Benin, trained an elite female fighting force known as the Agoji. These women served as royal guards and led military campaigns for over 2 centuries. European accounts often portrayed them with a mix of awe and unease, much like the conquistadors who wrote of women in the Amazon. And even in medieval Japan, women known as onabugeisha trained in swordsmanship and defended castles during wartime. While later samurai histories downplayed their roles, records and surviving artwork show they were far more than exceptions. And time and again, these women's stories were buried literally and figuratively. Their graves, forgotten chronicles, and oral traditions have only recently been taken seriously by scholars. The more we uncover, the more patterns emerge, women stepping into power only to be written out later. So when we hear stories of women fighting in the Amazon, it's not an isolated myth, it's part of a global echo. These stories don't challenge history, they remind us how much of it has been left out.
When European explorers entered the Amazon, they encountered more than unfamiliar landscapes. They met societies that didn't match their worldview. What they couldn't explain, they often recast as fantasy. For chroniclers writing to captivate audiences back home, it was easier to describe chaos and myth than to admit they didn't understand what they saw. Stories of female warriors fit perfectly into this framework. They echoed classical legends, excited European imaginations, and reinforced the idea that the New World was a place where nature and society were upside down. Women in positions of power, leading councils, defending territory, guiding rituals, became symbols of the wilderness itself, wild, inverted, in need of conquest. Colonial writers didn't just report what they saw, they shaped it. Their language exaggerated the unfamiliar, framing indigenous life through a lens of danger and disorder. The presence of strong women wasn't interpreted as cultural complexity, it was cast as unnatural, even threatening. One 17th century Portuguese friar described a society where men and women lived separately, only meeting for reproduction. Whether his account was accurate, misunderstood, or entirely invented, it echoed the European fear of gender systems that didn't mirror their own. And just like that, another layer was added to the growing myth of the Amazon women, not as leaders within their communities, but as strange, exotic beings beyond comprehension. In the hands of colonizers, the warrior woman became a tool of storytelling, more useful as myth than fact. But their portrayals tell us as much about Europe as they do about the Amazon. The discomfort with female authority, the need to tame difference, and the hunger for spectacle all helped shape the story that stuck. What they couldn't define, they exoticized, and in doing so, they rewrote a forest full of voices into a legend of their own making. Colonial writers shaped legends to fit their fantasies, but real voices and real power often lay beneath. If this fascinates you, Secrets of the Ancient World explores other moments where myth, memory, and material culture collide. You'll find the link in the pinned comment. The stories of Amazonian warrior women don't just belong to the past. Today, their legacy continues in indigenous women who lead their communities, not as myths, but as organizers, spiritual guides, and defenders of the forest. In Brazil,
Alessandra Korat Munduruku has emerged as one of the most recognized indigenous voices in environmental activism. A leader from the Munduruku people, she stood before courts and international organizations to oppose illegal mining and deforestation in the Tapajós Basin. She speaks not only as an activist, but as a descendant, referring to her work as protecting the land of her grandmothers. Across the Amazon, women are often at the center of resistance movements. They lead health campaigns, preserve endangered languages, and pass on oral histories. In communities where men are drawn into extractive labor or political conflict, women frequently become the primary stewards of culture and guardians of the land. In the eastern Peruvian Amazon, Ashaninka women led a community effort to expel illegal loggers from their territory. They coordinated patrols, built alliances across villages, and combined ancestral knowledge with legal strategies. What began as grassroots resistance resulted in formal protection of their land. It wasn't a battle in the traditional sense, but it was a decisive act of defense grounded in both tradition and strategy. These women are often overlooked by mainstream narratives, just as their ancestors were, but their work is ongoing, powerful, and deeply rooted. They don't need legends to define them. They're writing new stories with every protest, council, and ceremony. Leadership today doesn't wear a headdress or carry a weapon, but it commands just as much strength. What early explorers once described in disbelief is now happening in broad daylight, women shaping the future of the Amazon just as they shaped its past. When you see modern indigenous women reclaiming leadership once dismissed as legend, it hits differently. If this surprised or moved you, tap the super thanks. It helps keep these stories alive. And share your thoughts in the comments. Which part of this legacy felt the most real to you?
Even if someone has never read a colonial journal or heard of Francisco de Orellana, they probably know the word Amazon. The image of a powerful, independent female warrior has traveled far from the rainforest, and today it lives on in film, comics, and popular culture around the world. Wonder Woman, introduced in 1941, may be the most iconic modern echo. She comes from Themyscira, a hidden island of warrior women rooted in Greek mythology, but the name Amazon she carries is no accident. It traces directly to Orellana's 16th century report of women fighting along a South American river. That name made its way onto European maps, into global vocabulary, and eventually into fiction that recast warriors as superheroes. As the myth traveled, it changed. In early colonial stories, Amazonian women were framed as wild, inverted versions of civilized society. In modern media, they're reclaimed as symbols of strength, agency, and defiance. Films like The Woman King and Black Panther draw on historical all-female armies like the Ogoji of Dahomey to offer global audiences something that feels both timeless and timely, stories of women in command. What many don't realize is that these fictional Amazons have roots in real encounters, whether misinterpreted or remembered. A report written in the heat of hunger and confusion created a ripple that spread across centuries and continents. Today, the Amazon archetype continues to evolve. She wears armor, speaks truth, defends her people. She exists not only on the battlefield, but in courtrooms, protests, and classrooms. And though the jungle version may have been shaped by myth, the legacy it sparked still holds power. She is legend, but she's also reflection. Not of what we were, but of what we still could be. A mirror of who we fear, who we admire, and who we choose to remember. The Amazon River has always been more than a channel of water. It's a river of memory, legend, resistance, and reinvention. To the indigenous peoples who've lived along its banks for millennia, it's a sacred presence, a provider, a teacher, a witness. To European explorers, it became a mystery to be solved, a myth to be claimed, and ultimately, a name to be rewritten. We've followed a trail of stories, from ancient Greek fantasies to Orellana's jungle reports, from archaeological traces to living oral traditions.
We've met women who led councils, guided rituals, defended land, and shaped their world in ways that still echo today. Some of those stories were distorted, others were buried, but none of them disappeared. And now, the fun fact we promised. The name Amazon likely comes from the Greek word amazos, often translated as without breast. Early European writers imagined that mythical Amazon warriors cut off a breast to better draw a bow. It's a striking image, but almost certainly a myth itself. No indigenous group in South America ever used that name. It was a label imposed by outsiders, shaped by misunderstanding, and carried forward by maps and legends. In a twist of irony, the river that now bears their name was named after women who may never have used that word at all. But that's the strange power of stories. They distort, but they also endure. They create space for questions, for possibilities, for remembering what history tried to silence. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the warrior queen origins of the Amazon. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep listening, because the forest still speaks, and its stories are far from finished.